ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yes. 3, 2, 1. Well, howdy, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Your Mom on Drugs. We have today the son, Josh Klaus. Got my master's in public health. Hopefully going to use that today. And we have the mom on drugs. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Jennifer Seltzer, and I'm looking at Josh's t-shirt, and his t-shirt says data greater than feelings. I'm like, he's a data guy. So
I'm a very feelings-based guy too.
He is,
but
yes.
Sometimes you just got to follow the data. And even though you have this strong intuition that you believe in something, if the data doesn't support your belief, you got to abandon your belief. And that's the beauty of science. So today we are going to be talking about a topic that my mom and I we didn't know too much about, just because it's the topic of vaping and e-cigarettes. Neither of us are smokers. We never smoked in our life, but if you've ever walked around lately, you've probably noticed the big puffy white clouds that people are emitting from these e-cigarettes as opposed to tobacco cigarettes. And because they've gotten so much more popular over the years, and I believe it was inspired by you with either a family member or a friend that had done it. I don't know how you got curious and wanted to do this topic.
I think because we've done some other topics that were like, I don't know much about that. I think that's because you do see, every time you go to the ice house to pick up something, they're right there and stuff. You're like thinking, I don't know. Or there's these vaping stores, that you'll see in your towns and stuff. And I'm like thinking, what do people do in there, and stuff? So it was kind of, I don't really want to go in. So I thought, well, I'll just research it instead. So
yeah, instead of going into the store, we'll just spend copious hours of
That's
research
right.
on the topic.
Looking for that data.
Yeah, looking for that data. So I think we'll start off with maybe just kind of some basic information of what vaping is. I think maybe people might have some misperception of what it is. I definitely did. So maybe you can kind of lead off and talk about what vaping and e-cigarettes are, and maybe a little bit of background of how we got here as well.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to take it one step back from that,
even further back,
to talk about really tobacco use in general and stuff. And so, it was really interesting researching this. And anytime you do a presentation or collect data, you always learn something new. So we started using tobacco, tobacco was initiated for use in the United States. I believe it was in the 1700s, the late 1700s and stuff. So, and it's now the most preventable cause of death in the United States. So what we've seen over the last 4 decades approximately is that the smoking prevalence in adults has decreased by about 65%. So, pretty significant drop in smoking combustible cigarettes.
Right. And by combustible, we just mean that you have a material like tobacco
right.
in a piece of paper that will combust when you put a flame to it.
Right.
And then that flame will heat up that tobacco, become combined in some type of smoke, and then go inside of your lungs,
right.
which gets into your body.
Right.
And I looked up a stat too, at the height of smoking's popularity, which is I think in 1965, 42% of people smoked cigarettes. I mean, it's almost half the population.
I mean, both my parents smoked, which was so weird,
Very
and stuff. So yeah. So now it's really interesting. There are more people who formerly smoked cigarettes than actually smoke them now and stuff. But we still have about 11% or so of our population who smoke. That translates to about 28 million people. But again, that rate of smoking cessation has declined over the last decade. But there are still there's over 480,000 deaths associated with cigarette smoking or secondhand smoke per year in the United States. So that calculates to about 1 in 5 deaths annually associated with tobacco.
Man, I kind of want to piggyback off that point because it's amazing, like how small behaviors every day will lead to deleterious effects in the future. Almost kind of like financial responsibility. Like if you want to save for retirement or have a good savings account, you save a little bit each day. And you'll have a decent sized savings account. It feels very boring in the moment. Same thing with bad things. So Harvard did this longitudinal study or like a prospective study of following a certain group of people over time, and seeing like what are some things that make people healthy in the long term versus not healthy in the long term. Doesn't really determine causality, but there were associative factors.
Right.
And the 5 that they really stood out were social interactions, minimal alcohol use, lack of smoking, daily exercise, like 30 minutes of exercise. And I'm trying to remember the last
Sleeping, maybe sleeping, or no, I don't know what it was.
What is the last one? Oh, it's a healthy diet. So basically, and obviously that's, I think what that means is they don't overindulge, like eat within moderation. And if people did these 5 things that I just mentioned, they had an average extension of their lifespan by 14 years.
Whoa.
Which is insane. Like when you think about living from 70 to 84. Yeah. So smoking plays a huge role in that. Like Mom talked about, is like it really increases the risk of certain types of cancer and cardiovascular disease, which we're going to get into. But I think a lot of people don't understand like how bad smoking is sometimes. And I think one of the reasons we did a massive public health campaign from the 60s onward is because, like Mom said, it's such a preventable behavior and it causes such carnage in somebody's body and their life. And obviously it has knock-on effects for the rest of society.
Right. So not only does it have health effects, but it has an economic impact as well, too. So there are, I have data from 2010 to 2014, where 11.7% of all U.S. healthcare spending went to adult cigarette smoking. So that means taking care of people with adverse consequences of smoking and stuff. So that's crazy, Wow. And then in 2018, the estimated cost of loss of productivity due to cigarette smoking in the United States was $185 billion. So a lot of people didn't show up for work, so crazy. And interestingly too, and this is not hard to understand, tobacco use is greater in the economically disadvantaged because there's a lot of reasons. I mean, they may not be able to afford the nicotine patches and things to help the therapies that would help you to stop smoking, or it may be easier. I didn't really delve into all the reasons why that's the case.
I'm sure there are copious reasons. I mean, one of the things that I imagine, if you're economically disadvantaged, you're just looking for little wins. And I think sometimes things like a puff of a cigarette or a drink will just feel good if you feel like your life is stressed and you're not going anywhere. I mean, psychologically, I'm just trying to think about that way.
Yeah.
If you have no hope in long-term goals, why not focus on the short-term ones? Because at least they'll deliver something.
Yeah. So the other thing, too, that came out with this is that there are about 1,600 young persons under 18 years of age that will try their first cigarette every day in the U.S. And nowadays, and so this is going to be our great transition into our topic for today, a lot of that is due to what we call electronic nicotine delivery systems, or e-cigarettes. And the availability of these systems in pediatric populations could increase their risk of future combustible cigarette smoking, so regular cigarette smoking.
Yeah, I think that's the worry is like, is this a gateway drug to future tobacco smoking? We also want to, just as a caveat, even though they're called e-cigarettes, there's no tobacco, at least in some of these pods. It's very variable, this definition. But most of the time it is just a nicotine delivery mechanism with some other things that we'll talk about that come along for the ride. So the biggest difference here between regular cigarettes and e-cigarettes is that one delivers just nicotine, plus some other flavors that you've probably heard about. And tobacco cigarettes obviously deliver not aerosolized, but smoked tobacco into your lungs. And it's mainly like the tar is from that tobacco that have been associated with increased cancer risk rather than the nicotine itself. But nicotine itself does have some effects in the body, which Dr. Seltzer will talk about.
There you go. The biggest thing about nicotine is it's very addictive and it's very difficult to quit smoking. So one of the reasons that we would hopefully to encourage our young people not to start. So let's transition a little bit into what vaping is. And so the definition of vaping, the official definition that was recorded, is that it's the use of a handheld electronic device to breathe a mist or a vapor into your lungs. Usually it contains nicotine and flavoring. So that's what vaping is. It simulates smoking, but like Josh said, it's not an actual tobacco containing cigarette. It does have like nicotine in it and then some flavorings. Names of things that are considered e-cigarettes: it's an e-cigarette or a vape pen or a modifiable device. Interestingly, these modifiable devices are I think they were more popular earlier on with vaping, but they still exist there, and you can customize what you put inside your vape pen and stuff. So as far as the amount of nicotine and stuff like that, so that's why they're called mods and stuff.
That makes sense.
Vaping is similar to smoking a combustible cigarette, but it heats up. But the difference is it heats tiny particles. It heats tiny particles out of a liquid rather than burning tobacco. And the way that a vape pen works is it's a battery-powered device that heats the liquid, and it produces an aerosol that resembles water vapor, but it's not water vapor. It's an aerosol. And this aerosol, which is tiny particles, are inhaled into the lungs of a user. And the aerosol can contain nicotine for sure, and it contains flavoring. And then it can contain there's greater than 30 different types of chemicals that can be in this liquid as well, too. There can be carcinogens in it, potential carcinogens. There can be chemicals that could be associated with lung disease. Some people can put cannabis or marijuana in the device. There's also some more of a stabilizing agent called vitamin E acetate that's been linked to lung injury. Some heavy metals in there, and then the ultrafine particles can deeply penetrate into the lungs. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit as far as some adverse effects associated with vaping.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of times too is like, just because you find certain chemicals in something, you always want to compare it to a relative standard. So when I looked at the amount of carcinogens, specifically formaldehyde, that's inside of that vapor in a low voltage simulation, which is essentially so if you think about these vape pens, literally like a pen, and think about the base of the pen, that's where the battery is. And that is going to provide the current that supplies electrical energy up towards the tip of the pen, which is where you're going to be putting your mouth and drawing in. And then in between there is the reservoir where the nicotine is. And so the current is providing heat just due to Ohm's law, V equals IR. And then the resistance creates the heat, which heats up the liquid. And if you remember from basic physics or chemistry, if you heat up a liquid, what does it become?
A gas.
Oh my gosh. And then the gas obviously is a great thing to go inside of your lungs. And your lungs essentially are these really, really, really tiny branches with an amazing amount of surface area that these things called alveoli, which essentially facilitate gas exchange. So as you breathe in air, you take in that air, they go inside of your lungs, and then those tiny little alveoli, which are literally one cell thick, they will then exchange into the bloodstream of your body. And then that newly diffused blood will then go to your heart and then pump throughout your body. It's amazing. But if it's small enough, it'll go across those alveoli, and it's not just oxygen that gets into your blood, which is what we need. Some of these other things that are small enough, like nicotine, will get inside of your blood and obviously cause the effects that they do. But things like formaldehyde, if what I was going at is like, if you look at just the average concentration of formaldehyde in just regular air, there's a small concentration of it. It's about similar. So in a low voltage environment in a vape pen, but if you're going to be doing that 300 times a day, that is when it gets problematic. So if essentially just think about it as like maybe one puff, not too bad. But if you're breathing in 300 puffs in like the span of a couple of hours, then you're increasing the risk of accumulating more formaldehyde in your body. And obviously the more you do it, the more it increases. And the more you turn up that voltage, the more likely some of those things like formaldehyde are going to get into your system. So it really does depend on how often you're doing these vape pens and how high you're turning up the voltage. But what users have reported is like the higher voltage actually kind of gives this burnt taste, and they don't normally do that. So it's really this low voltage environment that most users are doing, because that delivers the flavorful smoke. It's not too harsh on the lungs. But yeah, it can produce a higher amount later on. So just want to kind of give that caveat, is like, you'll see a lot of times in studies, not just with vape pens, it's like, oh my gosh, there's mercury in fish. It's like, well, you kind of have to compare that to, first of all, what type of mercury is it? You know, there's organic versus inorganic mercury, and what is that compared to a normal diet that you're getting? So a lot of times you really want to think about the dose makes the poison. And the more you're consuming of that, obviously the more poison in you. But if it's kind of normal to your average diet, then not too much to worry about. So just wanted to give that as a caveat for vapors.
Perfect. The other point to make too is, we've all heard of secondhand smoke with cigarette smoking. You can also, bystanders can also breathe in the aerosol that's been exhaled by the e-cigarette user as well too. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about what does that mean in just a few minutes. Josh kind of talked about this already, but as far as the structure of an e-cigarette is concerned, the earlier ones looked more like a cigarette. Now they look more like a USB flash drive and stuff. So they're very small. And they contain a battery with a lithium rechargeable ion battery, which provides enough current to heat the atomizer, the atomizer is the heating element coil in the e-cigarette that's going to help it convert to the tiny airborne droplets that you can breathe in.
An atomizer is like it doesn't turn it into atoms, but like you've definitely used it if you've used perfume. It's like that spray. We call that an atomizer because it looks like these tiny little droplets that are just kind of spreading.
Or nasal spray.
Nasal spray is a great one.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great analogy to what the thing that's going in your lungs. It's not really water vapor. It's kind of more of this like almost like a sticky vapor-like substance.
Right.
So, but you think about it's on a really small scale. Sorry, keep going.
No worries. The battery will heat that atomizer up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit so that it'll get hot, so that it will atomize or aerosolize so that you can breathe it in. Then there are some e-cigarette containers that have a on-off switch, and if it has an on-off switch, it'll have a sensor on it so it senses that you're pressuring it to turn on. But other ones don't have that, and it'll just turn on when you take your first puff. And then I said the atomizer is what converts it to the aerosol liquid, and then it's the cartridge, which is either it's pre-filled or refillable. So it's either a one and done, or you can refill your vape pen. The cartridge holds the e-liquid, and most of the time it's combined with the atomizer. So the atomizer and the liquid are in that cartridge, and then you've got a mouthpiece to breathe in. So, other names that e-cigarettes go by are there's e-hookah, there's hookah sticks, and there's personal vaporizers as well too. And they're collectively called electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS. The most common products, I've got a couple. I'm not going to read this whole list. I've got a little table here, but Vuse is one. Juul is probably the one that most people see. When I was doing some literature, there was something called an Elf bar, but then that got removed because there was some sort of weird illegal things China was doing with Elf bars as far as tariffs or something. And so now it's EB Create is another form that you may see as well too. And that tended, maybe a number of years ago or several years ago, that was the most common one to be used in younger people, like middle schoolers, high schoolers and stuff. So Enjoy is another one and stuff. So you will have seen them if you've been in any, ice house, or convenience store.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So grocery store too. So vape terms that you may hear are juuling, which is obviously using a Juul brand or a similar type of a small vape device. And it's the top selling pod-based device. And it looks like a USB flash drive, and it first became available in 2015. Another way that people might use e-cigarettes or vape is that they'll take the liquid from their the cartridge, and you can drip it on the actual heating mechanism. And from what I understand, you can get a higher dosage of nicotine if you want by doing it that way.
Okay.
And then a person who vapes is called a vapor, not VAPOR, but VAPER. So anyway, and as with everything, practically, there's always some adverse effects that go along with what we do, including vaping. So the things that you'll probably, if you know somebody that vapes, the most common complaints that they may cite are going to be coughing, shortness of breath. They can have eye irritation, headaches, a dry, irritated mouth and throat, or nausea. And a lot of that's going to be, I would say, like headaches are most likely due to the nicotine component. The other things might be due to the aerosolization of the material, so that your eye irritation and stuff because of what you're breathing in could be due to that as well. Often, Josh and I always talk about the risks and benefits of whatever we're discussing, and so, when I looked at the literature, there's a lot of risks to vaping, and there's not a whole lot of benefits. I'm going to start with the benefits first because it's a fairly short list. And basically, there was a perceived benefit that e-cigarettes can assist in smoking cessation, but it really hasn't been proven true, because at least one study has shown that while vaping it's more effective than nicotine replacement therapies like the gum or the patch in helping people stop smoking combustible cigarettes. But what seemed to happen is that the people would continue using the e-cigarette and they wouldn't stop it. So that means that they're still getting nicotine. So while they're not getting burned tobacco, which got and inhaling actual smoke, which has got its long list of adverse events associated with it, they're still using nicotine long term. So it's like, wasn't that the idea, was to get rid of the nicotine ultimately and stuff? And so some people it's like I said, it's a really hard thing to stop doing.
Yeah, I think we'll probably get into this a little bit later as well, because, from my ears, that sounds great. It's like, and we'll get into some of the numbers of why I think that's great. But if you can get people to quit cigarette smoking and get them to do e-cigarette smoking, and they're just getting the nicotine rather than the nicotine plus the carcinogenic chemicals from tobacco and some of the other deleterious lung effects, then I say, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. That's a great trade for me. But we're going to talk about some of the numbers later and why might not reflect reality. But I mean, just like what Mom said earlier, it's like there are 480,000 deaths per year associated with cigarette smoking, and it costs 11% of our healthcare expenditure. So I don't think that vaping has that high of a medical cost. So if we can get those costs down and those deaths down, and if this seems to be a good replacement for it, I think that's the thing in question, is like, is it a good replacement? And I don't think we really know for sure yet. There have been some preliminary studies, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, this sounds very similar to, we can come to this later too. It sounds like the sex education, like abstinence versus safe sex versus non-safe sex, right? So if in a perfect world, you would have people abstain from sex to limit the risk of sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies, and potentially, have a monogamous relationship if you want one, with a person that you love and are committed to. But that's not realistic. So in lieu of that, it's like, okay, if people aren't going to be abstinent, then let's at least educate them on preventative measures like condoms and Plan B or birth control, so that we can at least mitigate some of those secondhand side effects. So for me, I see vaping very much in that space. And there are some other things like nicotine patches and gum, as a way to be like, okay, let's live in reality. Like, there are people out there who are going to smoke things, and like, what do we want them to smoke? So I don't know if you have any response to that, but that's kind of how I see it.
I understand where you're coming from. I want to talk about the risks associated with vaping so that we've got a whole picture of what, it's not like, oh, let me start e-cigarettes. There's no problems.
Correct.
Because there are some. So,
yeah, I agree. Okay, let's do that.
So when we compare vaping to a regular or a combustible cigarette smoking, both involve inhaling nicotine and other substances into their lungs. Like we've talked about, e-cigarettes heat liquid, whereas cigarettes burn tobacco and create smoke. So there are differences as far as risks associated with both of those. So I give that to Josh as far as better just to inhale what's going on with an e-cigarette, most likely, than the tar that you get from burning tobacco that you inhale with a cigarette. Because we've got a lot of data that supports, cardiovascular disease, lung cancer associated with cigarette smoking. Both vaping and combustible cigarette smoking are addictive. And it's that nicotine component is just hard to say no. And both can bring potentially dangerous chemicals into the body. It is unknown what long-term damage vaping may cause due to the limited time available. It was really interesting. I looked back, like I talked about at the beginning of this podcast. It was in the late 1700s that tobacco was first used in the United States. And it took until the 1900s, when we had mass production of cigarettes, that we started seeing the potential carcinogenic effects of combustible cigarettes. So vaping hasn't been out that long, maybe 10 years.
Well, the first e-cigarette was developed in China in 2003.
2003. Okay,
But
so we've got 15 years, maybe. Well, no, I can't do math.
22.
22
But
years.
to be mass produced and available, I would say 10 years. I would say like it's definitely gotten more popular between probably the 2010s to now, like over 10 to 15 year period. So yeah, I mean, you're comparing a couple hundred years, and I would say even because we could have a whole podcast on this, but like medicine was not scientific until it's still maybe the early 1900s.
Yes.
Like medicine was considered an art. It was very much like folk wisdom.
Apothecaries.
Like medicine has taken I think we always think of like, oh, yeah, it's, lab coats and hospitals and, and very, regimented procedures. And it's so hard to imagine that medicine was nothing like this in pre-industrial revolution and pre-enlightenment. And it has taken time to catch up. And as you probably observed in the medical space, there's a lot of different types of ways that people like to heal people, whether it be, the traditional or the modern medical system, or homeopathy, or alternative medicines, or functional medicine. Now, like, there's so many people obviously who want to feel better, and it is very normal for a lot of these modalities to exist, because for the longest time, there's a difference between feeling better and objectively being better. Like, I think a great example of this is when you take chemotherapy. Like, chemotherapy makes you feel awful, but you objectively can diminish the size or sometimes even eliminate the cancer inside of you. So if by that metric, it's like, this is a terrible thing, chemotherapy. It's like, well, it's a risk to reward ratio. Are you willing to take that risk to potentially get this reward? Whereas there's other things out there like homeopathy, which is you're literally diluting a substance sometimes by 1 million to 10 million fold. It's equivalent to taking like a piece of Tylenol, like one little pill, and then dissolving it in the ocean. And that is the dose that you're getting from homeopathy. Mm-hmm. And some people swear it's like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better by doing it, because it feels good to take something
placebo effect.
Exactly. It feels good to take something that you think works. So I think it's really good to differentiate. Just because something feels good, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. Just think about all those people on crack cocaine. And then sometimes taking a little bit of medicine, even though it doesn't feel good to do it, or even exercise for that example, or abstaining from that extra dessert that you want to have. It's like, but in the long run, it might be healthy. So I think it's really good to differentiate between something that feels good I went on a long rabbit hole to
you
talking
did.
about the
Yes.
history of medicine
Yes.
and things like that.
Which we're really talking about the fact is that we don't really know what the long-term effects of vaping are going to be.
Thanks for landing that
There
plane.
you go.
I
There you
appreciate
go.
that.
So, yeah. So, but, and again, too, I don't know how long it is. I mean, I think about my late father-in-law. He smoked cigarettes, until he was 50. And he lived until he was 95 and developed lung cancer. And he had not smoked in 45 years. And so it's like, woo, and stuff. So that's crazy and stuff. So, so you just don't know how long it's going to take to see some potential adverse effects from the vaping mechanism. So,
yeah, I think maybe later on in the podcast, we'll talk about a little bit about basic cancer dynamics. Cause I think it's important to tell people that cancer is not one of those things that like you just suddenly get. It's like a cascade event that happens from little things over time. But I'll save my other long soliloquy for later in the podcast.
This is the Josh hour. So yeah. So anyway, okay. So let's get back to some of the other risks associated with vaping. If you have asthma, which is a restrictive air disease, it affects your breathing. Vaping can make that get worse. It can also cause lung inflammation, so it can cause scarring. It can narrow or irritate your bronchi or your bronchioles inside your lungs, which are part of the air sacs inside your lungs that help you breathe. So when you get scarring or irritation of those or narrowing, then it makes it more difficult to breathe. So you can get shortness of breath, and that's a kind of a scary feeling and stuff. So you can also get lung scarring due to some of the components inside the liquid that you have for these e-cigarettes, and so that can cause popcorn lung, and it can cause some permanent lung scarring as well too. Now again, the incidences of these I don't have, but we don't have as many people vaping as we do cigarette smoking, so it's going to be lower numbers, but it can happen. So it's just something to be aware of.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think the epidemiology is a little in its infancy stage at the moment for this. So there's probably been observations like, oh, here's a person who vaped, they have popcorn lung. Right. But like compared to other populations, yeah, we might not have that data yet.
Right. You can have other organ damage. You can have damage to your heart or your brain, especially in adolescents that are using nicotine, because nicotine affects and adversely the brain development. It affects the areas that control attention, learning, mood, impulse control. So that's, you can, as your young person is continuing to develop their, brain functioning, you don't want to put anything, you don't want them using something that could adversely affect that. The nicotine contained inside e-cigarettes can also increase your blood pressure, and it can also narrow arteries. So that can cause issues long term. There was a condition called e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. And it was a serious lung condition that was possibly caused by that vitamin E acetate that's inside that e-cigarette liquid. It would cause widespread lung damage with symptoms like cough, shortness of breath, chest pain, fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and a rapid heartbeat. But the case, it was associated with in the early 2020s, but now I think that the cases have been declining. I think they've just they've improved the techniques for making e-cigarettes.
Well, some places have banned selling vitamin E acetate along with some of these packs, as well as it's also THC. Those are the two things that were associated with these EVALI events, or EVALI, which is the acronym that Mom talked about. And it was kind of causing these pneumonia-like symptoms. And there was something, so vitamin E, we often think is like, oh, that's a great thing. You put it on your skin, promote skin health. But inhaling it is a very different story. It's this, if you've ever used...
It's a fat. So
if you've ever thought about, I don't know if you've ever tried to wash your hands with fat without soap, it's not coming off. So just think about that inside of your lungs. And if that gets on your lungs, then it's not going to be able to do proper gas exchange. And you're going to get some of these chronic conditions. You might have these immune events because your body's obviously trying to heal itself. So it's going to attack the lungs and that's going to cause the scarring. And so some of these substances that are dissolved in these cartridges can be worse than others, which leads to some of these events. And I think probably they've declined because some of these, I think some people have caught on, be like, oh, don't do it with vitamin E.
Yeah.
And also some places have outright banned the sale of that. So it's harder to get.
Okay. Addiction, we've mentioned, as well as e-cigarette. If you start with an e-cigarette, you could transition to smoking regular combustible cigarettes. The secondhand exposure that may potentially be associated with e-cigarettes as well as combustible cigarettes. Interestingly, and I apologize that I don't have an incidence of this, but because your e-cigarette is battery operated, there have been some cases of that battery, that the vape pen exploding, and so it can cause a burn or an injury to a person and stuff. So that's
I would say that's true of lithium-ion batteries in general, because that's also happened in tablets and in phones and as well as computers. So if you're going to buy something with a lithium-ion battery in it, if it's not well made, I mean, and it's true of any manufacturing, like you're always going to get some type of defect, and you might be the unlucky person who gets the defect. But yeah, I mean, if your cigarette's not going to explode, but yeah, this e-cigarette might, just because it has a battery inside of it.
There you go. We talked about cancer as well, too, as a potential risk. And then the death rate that I could find with e-cigarette smoking were 2019, 2020 data. So now we're 5 years out, but there were 68 people that had died from those E-valley lung injuries. Not the rest of them, but this was just specifically the E-valley. That was the most significant lung damage that was found with vaping.
Yeah. And that's why I would argue that's less people that would die in 1 week from smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Even if like Mom said, we don't know entirely the long-term harms. As we know from living, sometimes death isn't the worst thing. Like you can definitely get some long-term consequences that are not fun to be alive. So that's why we have morbidity and mortality. So sometimes even the morbidity, which means like the symptoms that you have to live with, could be slightly worse.
I was just looking to see if I had a new death rate for vaping, but it's still that 68 people number. So you can also develop it. So there's poisoning and toxicity associated with vaping as well, too, because those containers that are inserted inside of a vape pen are concentrated amounts of nicotine. And if a kiddo got it, or you accidentally spilled it all over your skin, it can have irritant effects to your skin, but it could cause nausea and vomiting, and it could potentially cause serious effects for a kiddo because it's nicotine. And so it could increase heart rate and blood pressure, and so it'd be a significant thing. So you got to be careful.
So if a kid accidentally drinks it
because it's a liquid.
Yeah.
Because, kids are curious.
Yes,
so So that is one of the things, too, that could come with that as well, too, is that if you use large nicotine doses, so a kiddo ingests a whole bottle of an e-cigarette liquid, they could develop seizures as well, too. So an average vape pod contains the equivalent of 20 cigarettes. So
yeah, this is an important point, because I think it's really one of the hard things to recognize, too, is this concept called bioavailability. So what I mean by that is that when you ingest a substance inside of you, it can either be dissolved and go into your bloodstream and be available for use inside of your body, or it can be bound to something else and then not be able to be used to your body. So the bioavailability is this thing that can essentially be used by your cells or used in something else. Due to the delivery mechanism of cigarettes versus e-cigarettes, and also just using another source of tobacco that delivers nicotine, is this stuff called snus, which is essentially like a little tobacco pack. That they're also called Zins in the United States, and you put them on the bottom of your lip or the top of your lip.
Saw them at the ice house this morning.
You can get everything at the gas station here in America, especially Doritos, which I love. But you put that in, and it's a slow drip.
Bad.
But we're going to talk about this too. Okay. I know that's the gut reaction, but data's greater than feelings. But so when you are taking nicotine into your body, let's just use the tobacco, the one that you put on your upper lip. that is about a 30 to 50% bioavailability. So only the amount of nicotine that's in that pack, only about 30 to 50% gets into your bloodstream. With e-cigarettes, well, let's just talk about cigarettes. Cigarettes, it's a lot cleaner. Essentially, if you take in a cigarette, about 90% of that nicotine will get inside of your bloodstream. Crazy enough, cigarettes are really well regulated, meaning that you kind of know exactly what you're getting when you're smoking a cigarette. E-cigarettes, crazy. I mean, the amount of variability of nicotine that you get. Like, I looked at these studies where these people essentially like did simulated e-cigarettes. So essentially they got a machine that kind of like artificially puffed an e-cigarette. And the amount of nicotine that they got from different brands and different types of e-cigarettes was essentially between like 0.025 milligrams for every 15 puffs that you like take from the e-cigarette to 0.75 milligrams. I know those are tiny numbers, but if you think about like that is almost that is more than a 10-fold difference. I think it's like a 30-fold difference. And it just depends because this industry is so young and it is not well regulated, especially in the United States. So essentially, it's kind of deemed as like a supplement. And you just don't need to do any testing to determine what dose is in there. So you really don't know how much nicotine you're getting. So if you buy like a Juul versus a Vuse versus what was the other brand that you told me? The one that rebranded.
Elf Bar, but
Elf
now
Bar,
it's like
but now it's the
EB Create.
Yeah.
EB Create. Or Enjoy.
They are not required to do formalized testing to basically talk about how much nicotine is in these pods, and they could be incredibly variable. That being said, even if we did the upper bounds of what these are, you're probably, if you consumed one Juul pack a day, you'd get about 40 milligrams of nicotine inside of your body. So to get that kind of seizure threshold that Dr. Seltzer was talking about, you would need to do like 2 of those a day, and you'd have to do it in pretty rapid succession. So if you're a parent and you see your kid, or if you are a person who vapes, if they're doing 2 of these a day, that really increases your risk of nicotine toxicity. That could increase the risk of seizure and some of these other deleterious effects. So doing it quickly and as well as doing it a lot is obviously going to increase the amount of nicotine that's in your body.
1 Juul pod 20 cigarettes. Okay, so it's 20 cigarettes per 1 Juul pod. So yeah, okay. So, and the amount of nicotine in 1 standard Juul. Wait. I'm
just saying the reason that they say that is because
it's 200 puffs. 200 puffs.
Like, yeah, 200 to 300 puffs. Because people going off cigarettes, because like Mom said, nicotine is so addictive. In order to get the equivalent of the nicotine delivery, they have to make it 20 times more concentrated because the bioavailability in a vapor is very different than tobacco smoke.
Yes.
So even though that's a bit misleading to say, it's like, oh, they have 20, it's like 20 times the cigarette. It's like, well, you have to do more puffs.
That makes a lot of sense.
To get the same amount of nicotine, because if you're already addicted to nicotine, let's say you're a smoker and you're trying to move to e-cigarettes,
right?
You're going to have to smoke more of the e-cigarette to get the same nicotine concentration.
Right. And you know what would happen too is that if they didn't do it that way, you would just give up. You would just go back to cigarettes. Correct. Because you're like, oh, I'm not getting the effect I need, so I'm just going to go back to my regular cigarettes. So,
yeah, exactly.
So yeah. One other issue that's associated with not only it's associated with e-cigarettes as well as combustible cigarettes is that nicotine itself causes fetal toxicity and adverse pregnancy outcomes, and that's been noted for a long time. So nicotine damages the fetal brain and the lungs, and it can also result in low birth weight and preterm birth. So you don't want to use it in pregnant women. So okay, we're going to move now to talking about, and we've kind of alluded to this, about using e-cigarettes in youth. So as we've kind of alluded to, using e-cigarettes or vaping is much greater than other tobacco products in the U.S. use. In 2024, there were 1.63 million students in the United States using e-cigarettes. That's 5.9% of our students. 410,000 were middle school students, whereas 1.21 million were high school students. And out of all of the students who have used e-cigarettes, there were 43% that report current use. And those with current use are reporting that they use mostly the flavored e-cigs. And then about a third of those used an e-cig on at least 20 out of the last 30 days. And about 1/4 used an e-cig every day. And disposable e-cigarettes were used in a little over half, with females being greater than males as far as using e-cigs. Juul is the most common brand of e-cig used in youth. It contains what they call a protonated nicotine, which the company claims is associated with reduced issues with taste, smell, and throat irritation, which I think that was the deal with when you'd start, if you were trying to learn how to smoke a cigarette, you'd breathe it in and it was really irritating and stuff. So you had to acquire the ability to do that. And so I'm sure that maybe other e-cigs may have that associated with it, but Juul promotes that they have less associated with that. And they have a variety of tastes associated with it, mango and mint. And so, they make it like really enticing to get these kiddos hooked on this stuff. So it increases their desire to experiment. And like I said, it resembles a USB drive. So it's really a lot easier to hide from authority figures or to use in areas where smoking is forbidden. So they call that stealth vaping.
Okay.
So,
what's not stealthy is that big cloud of vapor that's going to come out of your lungs. So even though the device can be hidden,
yeah.
he's like, yeah, I see what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. New kind of gum.
Yeah.
So, most interestingly, I found this very interesting. A lot of middle school and high school students who vape want to quit and have tried to quit. 2020 data show us that those who wanted to quit were about 64% of users, and those who have tried to quit is about 67%. And many youth practice dual usage, so they're using vapes plus cigarettes or cigars. That was 2024 data, with 1 in 3 middle and high school students doing both. And also e-cigarettes, depending on the device that you have, may allow you to be it may be a delivery system for other substances like cannabis, like we talked about, so marijuana as well too. In 2016, 1 in 3 middle school students and 1 in 4 high school students reported ever using cannabis in their e-cigarette. So yeah, economically, vaping from 2020 to 2024, the unit sales increased by 34.7% from 15.7 million units to 21.1 million units. These were only brick and mortar data. That does not include online purchases. So it's going to be more than this. And the percentage of disposable e-cigs doubled. Over 80% of the sales are for flavors other than tobacco. Tobacco is not the favorite flavor. Usually it's mint or menthol. And the total cost of e-cig sales in June of 2024 was $488.9 million. But you compare that to cigarette sales from 2023. 2023, you had 7.6 billion packs sold for a price of approximately $106 billion. So what
insane.
Is that?
Well, you think about it.
A fourth of it?
No.
Wait, I'm not doing math right. So
think about it. So it's like, let's just round up that first number. It's 500 million. That's $500 million.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Whoa. It's like way less.
Yeah. That's
way
like
less.
2,000 times more.
Yeah. And interestingly, vaping accounts for about $22 billion in output, or 0.1% of our gross domestic product. So they've got about 134,000 Americans employed, creating vaping devices.
Yeah,
and
so
vaping materials.
Yeah, you think about not just the packs, but also the devices. Also, there's like the shops that people go to, and there's like these vaping bars that you can just kind of hang out at. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. Very similar to alcohol.
Right. So it's not providing jobs or for a lot of people, but it does provide jobs for some.
Yeah, a growing industry.
Yeah. So we always look at myths and and misunderstandings about our topics. And so vaping is no different. So like we've talked initially, one of the myths is that vaping helps stop smoking, and this is not necessarily true, and the Food and Drug Administration has showed that people may stop smoking combustible cigarettes, but they will continue smoking with an e-cigarette, so that people are still subject to being exposed to nicotine.
Yeah, and I think this is where Dr. Seltzer and I might not see eye to eye, because I don't really care that much if people are addicted to nicotine, because I just think that being addicted to something is not as, it sounds bad, but there are different things to be addicted to. So if I'm going to be addicted to smoking, I'd rather be addicted to the thing that just gives me the addictive chemical nicotine, as opposed to nicotine plus the tobacco tar. Like, I drink coffee every morning. I would argue that I'm addicted to coffee, and some might say I'm addicted to caffeine, but I don't seek caffeine out in any other variety. I'm sure there is a way to get caffeine that's less healthy than coffee. So I'm okay with my caffeine addiction, because I know that long-term health-wise, it's not too bad for me. Whereas, yeah, if you told me that there's caffeine in a cigarette, I'd be like, that's okay. I get my caffeine somewhere else. So for me, it's all about, can you replace one thing for another? But I did look up a study, and there was one done in Southern California where they found students who had never done e-cigarettes before, and then they followed them, I think over a 2-year period. And then they asked them, have you started smoking regular cigarettes now? And comparing the students who basically both groups had never done e-cigarettes, and then one started to do e-cigarettes. And they followed those two groups. So never did an e-cigarette, only did e-cigarettes. Compared to those two, did you try a cigarette? If you did try an e-cigarette, you were more like, I think 6 times more likely to do tobacco cigarettes. It just seems to be a culture, like people who smoke together stick together. And so if you are going to smoke, you're probably going to be around other people who do smoke. So I'm not saying that if you do e-cigarettes, you're never going to smoke tobacco cigarettes. But for those of you who are already doing tobacco cigarettes, can we get you to switch to doing just e-cigarettes? And even though you might be addicted for life, if we're going to assume the worst case scenario, I would much rather that. I don't know if you have any response to that.
I do have a response to that. So while we know that tobacco smoking can be associated more, we have data that support the relationship between tobacco smoking and lung cancer development. Nicotine also has an adverse output on cardiovascular disease. So if you already have cardiovascular disease and you take nicotine in, you can worsen it, or you could, if you just happen to be predisposed, taking daily nicotine could also worsen that. So that's my argument against using nicotine, on a regular basis and stuff. So even if you switch from now, I understand your argument. We don't know how much, and maybe they're getting less nicotine with an e-cig. And so
it's hard to say.
That would, maybe so. So yeah, if you're taking in less and then you can handle that, that's fine. But it's not without any risk at all. So
yeah. So what you're saying is, like, you would like people to do neither behavior.
Right.
For just from a health standpoint.
Right.
But I think all I'm saying is, like, I agree with you. I think that neither should be done. But if we had a choice.
Right.
I would definitely say just nicotine rather than nicotine plus, tobacco.
Right.
Because that has obviously been shown to cause massive amounts of harm.
Right.
To people.
So
cool. We agree.
That kind of leads us to the second myth, that vaping is safer than smoking. And we talk about that, but don't forget too that the liquid that is the solvent for these, the nicotine for the e-cigarettes contains chemicals, and we're not exactly sure the long-term impact of those. So we just need to be aware of that.
I agree. Yeah.
So, and that kind of goes to with the fact that vaping produces harmless water vapor. It's not water. It's an aerosol that contains stuff in it, different types of chemicals. So it's not just if you breathe water inside your lung, that's not what your lungs are not built for that. So think about when you inhale water from the swimming pool. It's not a pleasant experience.
That's
so
true.
Yeah. vaping doesn't create secondhand smoke, and that's not true. It contains, it's not smoke per se, but it's an aerosolized vapor that people can also breathe in. It can also land on surfaces and clothing, and it can be breathed in through that as well too. And again, we just don't know what that's going to cause long term. It's easy to quit vaping. It's not easy to quit vaping. If once you start with nicotine, you tend to crave more nicotine. So it's that's especially concerning in our teenagers that start at such an early age.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's why we have a lot of these like replacement therapies. So if you did do cigarette smokes, we have to say nicotine gum, nicotine patches. Actually, I just read the FDA approved. This is like this past week. They approved it's not FDA approved, but the FDA approved the sale of basically those pouches that I was talking about. They're called Zins, basically as a way to be like a safer alternative to smoking cigarettes and potentially e-cigarettes as well. So because what they found a lot in Scandinavian countries where that's this type of so actually Zins are just nicotine. It's not tobacco.
Okay.
So it's just very similar to like an e-cigarette where it's just liquid nicotine. There's basically liquid
little pouches,
and you suck on them rather than smoke them, which sounds weird, but some people like it.
Whatever. Yeah.
So anyways, they have found in the Scandinavian countries where it's much more popular there that has been shown to be a great replacement therapy because people get addicted to these. They call them snus in Scandinavia, and they're very hard to give up. People love them because obviously they're nicotine, but they find that it's a good replacement from when they're switching from smoking, but they can still get that nicotine high, which is really the thing that they want. So they'll essentially substitute one for the other. So the states have caught on to this, and the FDA just announced, I think it was like January 16th, and we're recording this on the 23rd of January, 2025. And so I thought that was really cool.
That is interesting. I think two thoughts I have on that. Let's see if I can remember my two thoughts. One is, yes, I can. Amazingly, I can remember my two thoughts. First of all, nicotine. If you do substitute it with that, then you're not going to have the secondhand smoke, issue or aerosolized for bystanders and stuff. So that's interesting. My concern, and I'm thinking the FDA, and again, because I did not look into this, I saw it, but I thought we're talking just about e-cigarettes today, but I appreciate you bringing this up. I know with snuff, which is, pouch tobacco in your gum line, it does increase mouth cancer.
Correct.
So I'm hoping then that it's the tobacco part of that does it and not the nicotine part.
That is correct.
Because I would be concerned then with these pouches of nicotine in your mouth that we don't want mouth cancer.
And it doesn't. Yeah. If you look at the epidemiology in Scandinavia where they're done, especially if they're ones that are not, they're just nicotine pouches, the rate of cancer doesn't increase. So it's
very interesting.
It's
very
mainly
interesting.
Tobacco.
Yeah, very interesting.
I know.
So you still have the nicotine issue, but so it's getting to be a safer. If you can consider safer.
Yeah, it's just lowering the hazard or risk. It's like if I still get my nicotine, can I lower the threshold of the risk of causing a long-term health outcome?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people want to avoid things like mouth cancer and lung cancer and
heart disease and
cardiovascular events.
Stroke, stuff like that.
Also just like, I don't know if you've ever had a day where you got an infection, like a lung infection, but just like not breathing well. It's just like a really drag on your life. You can't exercise as well. It just really limits your quality of life. And you only get 2 of these little sacs inside of your body to facilitate gas exchange. So take care of them.
Yeah. Also, too, I personally hate cigarette smoke and walking in rooms that are full of cigarette smoke. So that, would reduce that as well, too, because it affects me adversely, and so that's, anyway. So
I think one of the greatest public health things we did is that we created the smoking section only or banned people from smoking in restaurants, which I couldn't believe.
Yeah. And on airplanes.
Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah. So, hallelujah. So, and in hospitals, you used to be able to smoke in hospitals, and now you can't do that anymore. Thank goodness. So let's talk about quitting vaping because I don't think it would be complete without talking about that because nicotine is addictive. And so If you want to know whether or not you're potentially addicted to nicotine, here's some symptoms or some signs that might indicate that. First of all, you crave it, that you're like, I've got to have it. I've got to have my Diet Coke every day. So I think I'm addicted to the caffeine in it, or the carbonation, one or the other and stuff. So, but I don't want to give it up. So, but anyway, that's another story for another day. If you feel like you're unable to stop using nicotine, then that's going to be a sign of an addiction. And also, interestingly too, if you develop a tolerance to it, that means you need more to get the same effect. Then that's going to kind of indicate an addictive type of a situation. There are symptoms with nicotine withdrawal. And so it's kind of tough to go through. So if you stop vaping, you could have some withdrawal symptoms, such as feeling irritable or jumpy or restless, feeling sad or down, having trouble sleeping, having a hard time concentrating, feeling hungry, or craving nicotine. But those withdrawal symptoms will go away over time as your brain gets used to not having nicotine. If you do want to stop, then have a plan to quit with goals. Make a list of reasons to quit vaping. Set a quit date. Talk to your healthcare provider so they can help you, and tell your friends and family so they can be accountability partners for you as well. Avoid any temptations or triggers. So don't go places where you know that people are vaping, so that you would get drawn back into that as well too. Get some exercise. Getting those endorphins going, helps you to have a good feeling and helps your body feel good. So that would be a good thing. And if you are having some cravings and experiencing some side effects, you could use the nicotine gums or patches as well too to help with that as well too. And then you could utilize your favorite relaxation technique, either prayer or meditation or yoga or deep breathing, to help you, get through those toughest moments and withdrawal as well too.
Yeah, that's well said. I think it might prove useful to talk why nicotine is so addictive.
Okay.
So you essentially have this area in your brain called the ventral tegmental area, which has a lot of neurons that secrete this thing called dopamine. Dopamine is this thing called a neurotransmitter. You might have heard it in the literature. It's been known as like the pleasure chemical or the reward chemical. It's not exactly how it works. It's actually the anticipation of reward that is what develops nicotine. It's like the anticipation of reward that develops that feeling, because dopamine is it drives you towards a goal. So it's essentially wanting you to eat food. It's wanting you to procreate. It is wanting you to do the things that an organism does. So what nicotine does is that it attaches to these neurons, and it basically releases tons of dopamine into your system, getting you that feeling of like, oh, I'm gonna get a reward. I'm so excited. I'm about to be rewarded. But it does it so much that essentially your body can't make more of it. And so that's kind of the depleted feelings that you're getting, like what mom was saying, feeling sad or feeling down or trouble sleeping. It kind of throws off your natural rhythms of these reward chemicals. There's this great book called Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke that I highly recommend reading if you are a person who suffers from addiction or know someone who does, because I think it really talks about of all this stuff that we're saying is like limiting addiction. It makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense that all those kids that they interviewed, like, do you want to quit? And they go, like almost 70% of them said, yeah, of course I do. But saying you want to quit and quitting is so hard. And because it requires a lot of willpower, and it requires a lot of like rewiring your brain to want something it doesn't want. And that takes a really long time. It'd be asking mom to give up her Diet Coke. It'd be asking me to give up my coffee. And it's like, no, absolutely. I know I could, but it would take a lot of work. And it would be like, do I really want to give this up? And I think a lot of times with these chemicals, and I think it's true of a lot of addictive behaviors, I think we look at people and we think, oh, you have no willpower. Like, it's your fault. But yeah, this is how your brain was made. And this is how it does. So I think a lot of times when you see someone who's addicted to anything, like, realize that could have been you. You just have your own addiction that's more socially acceptable, whether it be exercise, Diet Coke, or coffee. And when someone's trying to quit, I think the thing that they need the most is support and accountability, because a lot of times, like, being encouraged, like making these small steps towards coming through is a really important thing. So I just wanted to lay that out, because yeah, some of these chemicals, things like cocaine and nicotine, are really, really powerful releasers of dopamine in the brain. And that's why they're incredibly addictive.
Yeah. So to wrap up our talk today about vaping, the conclusions that I've come to after looking at the literature is that really no tobacco product is completely safe, including e-cigarettes. But we've talked about that e-cigarettes may provide a less risky exposure to nicotine than a regular combustible cigarette.
Right, because they're technically not a tobacco product.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
So, nicotine is contained in most e-cigarettes, and it is highly addictive, and it is a health danger for pregnant women, including developing fetuses and the youth. So we want to minimize use in those patient populations. The aerosol from e-cigarettes could be harmful to those standing by, so we want to be respectful of the people that are around us as well. So trying to encourage youth and young adults to not start using an e-cigarette so that they may avoid nicotine addiction in the future and the transition toward combustible cigarette use and maybe cannabis use as well is a goal, I think, as well, because e-cigarettes can be a springboard for those other mechanisms. So maybe encouraging other activities other than e-cigarette use. And then we don't know we don't know really what the long-term effects of e-cigarette use are. So I think we just need to be cognizant and be wise and do just be aware of what people are finding out as far as it's concerned. Because I tell you, you think about things that you did when you were younger, and then you reap the consequences of it when you're older. I think about me laying out in the sun and as a teen, and listening to my father tell me I'm going to be sorry, and now I'm in my 60s and I wish I'd listened to him, and stuff. So now I get at least an annual visit to the dermatologist to check me out for skin cancers because I've already had one. So I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, so we just we want to be smart as far as using these products.
Yeah, that's really well said, and especially with something that has an unknown risk. I think there's going to be certain persons like, what's the big deal? We don't know. And then there's going to be the opposite side of that of like, I'm going to be extremely cautious. But I really love the point that you made about like how young people could potentially become cigarette users from this behavior. And I think that really hints at an interesting nexus point with e-cigarettes is that I think what we want to do is that we want to get adult cigarette users to start using e-cigarettes as a preferable alternative. But we also don't want young kids to start smoking at all. So like having policies and, from our government or even within our corporations of like, can we not sell to kids, but can we sell to adults, and especially adults who are making the switch from cigarettes. So like, it seems like a really unique public health problem because you want to demonize e-cigarettes to young people, but you also want to highlight their benefits to adults who are already smoking. And I think as humans, we have a really hard time being nuanced and seeing two truths at once. So I'm really hoping that we can kind of thread that needle of, because there was this, I can't remember the exact survey, but there's a survey of, I think it was 1/4 or 25% of people think that e-cigarettes are more harmful than regular tobacco cigarettes. Wow. So there's this really kind of anti-vaping campaign going around because I think it's being targeted to kids and people think it's being targeted to kids, and I think rightly so. But I think it's also missing the bigger message of like, if we just universally demonize this, we might be causing more harm because we're going to push adults back into traditional cigarette smoking. Yeah. So,
and we also discovered too. I mean, again, I'm pretty naive. I lived in a protective world growing up. I mean, maybe I still do now, but in the state of Texas, vaping materials are not. They're not supposed to be sold to anyone under 21 years of age. So then you think, okay, how do you get all these middle schoolers and high schoolers started on these things? So those of you that are providing these to those young people, maybe you shouldn't do that. So, and I'm sure there's all kinds of loopholes and stuff that I just don't even know about because I'm kept in the dark. But so anyway, so just be wise.
Listen to your mother, y'all. Your mom on drugs. Well, we so appreciate y'all coming in and joining us for this great episode. I feel like it was a mixture of your mom on drugs and your son on risk.
Yes.
It was definitely a combo today. But we hope that you tune in for our next episode. And we hope you check out our back catalog because it's full of good material. But until next time, I'm the son, Josh.
And I'm the mom, Jenny.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.